glass burst like a warning bell as the phone slammed onto the bar, and Maya Collins said, "Tell me it isn't my messages you read to them." Ethan Parks smirked, the crowd's laugh still echoing. And he said, "Relax. They love the story." My stomach turned cold, because the story was mine, kept for him whispered after midnight. Jenna Patel hovered near the doorway, eyes pleading for calm, but silence cut sharper than her caution. Liam Reyes touched my elbow and said, "Maya, step back," but my steps only found the crack in the floor where everything tipped. I saw screens glow, my words trapped in their light, a chorus of screenshots traded for applause. Ethan said, "They finally see me," and the way he said me snapped the last thread. I remembered backyard promises, cheap sodas, rain on our shoulders, and the vow to guard each other's secrets. The room smelled of citrus and betrayal. My voice turned steady and small and I said, "You sold my trust for their attention." He lifted his chin, chasing the sound of claps, and the bar roared while the night swallowed our years. The bartender killed the music, and the quiet felt like a bruise spreading under skin. Ethan said, "You always made it about us, but no one noticed me." My throat tightened as the word "us" dangled like a broken sign. I remembered the first time he called at 2 a.m., and I ran through rain with soup and jokes to keep him warm. Jenna said, "Maya, this isn't the place," but the place had already become the crime scene. Liam steadied a stool and said, "You don't fix trust by breaking it on stage." Ethan laughed without joy and said, "They listened when I performed your secrets." Each face watched us like we were a cliff edge. I wanted to rewind the night and pat it with kindness, yet the reel kept cutting forward. I said, "You knew my fear of public pity," and the admission stung like salt. He looked at the empty mic and at me, measuring applause against history. The bartender slid water toward my hand, and it trembled. The glass chimed, a small bright funeral bell for what we swore to guard. When the door swung open and rain hissed in, I tasted metal at the back of my tongue. Ethan said, "If I'm honest, I envied how people trusted you." I steadied the water and remembered him failing a class, and how I sat beside him until sunrise. Jenna's reflection wavered in a chrome tap like a truth trying to harden. Liam said, "Envy is not a reason, it is a knife." Ethan flinched as if the word had weight. The crowd began to scatter, embarrassed to witness the unmaking of an oath. I said, "You could have asked for help instead of applause." He stared at the floor, counting gouges in the wood like exits. The smell of peel and gin lifted, bright and mean. Jenna said, "This will follow you both," and her voice carried the gravity of someone who keeps receipts. Ethan whispered, "I wanted to be seen," and the confession limped into the quiet. The rain outside grew louder, as if the night insisted on washing us clean while we stayed stained. We took the argument to a back hallway lined with framed gig posters, each one a faded promise. Ethan said, "They cheered because I was brave." I said, "You were loud, not brave." The words landed flat, like coins that buy nothing. Liam hovered near a red exit sign, a lighthouse for common sense. Jenna traced a crease in a poster and said, "Brave is owning harm." Neon bled through the doorway and painted Ethan's cheekbones with carnival color. He swallowed and said, "I didn't think you'd care this much." I laughed because the alternative was crying, and laughter felt stolen too. The hallway smelled of damp paper and lemon cleaner, a mix of memory and disguise. I said, "Trust is a home. You evicted me for a crowd." He reached out, then let his hand fall, as if the distance had teeth. Somewhere a bottle cracked, and we all flinched like the sound was a verdict. By the service door the alley breathed steam, and the city hummed like a warning wire. Ethan said, "Tell me how to fix it," and the plea hung crooked. I said, "You don't fix a shattered lens, you learn not to drop it." The metaphor tasted bitter, yet it fit the night's camera flash cruelty. Liam said, "Start by apologizing without audience," and the alley swallowed the advice. Jenna looked between us and said, "Decide whether you want forgiveness or attention, because you won't get both." Ethan closed his eyes, and the storm gave him a clean frame for a second. I remembered bike bells in summer, and the way we used to race home for dinner. A soft archive now gone. I said, "You turned my confession into your audition." He nodded, small and broken, and said, "I did." A siren wailed somewhere distant, thin as thread, and I finally felt the thread snap. The door clicked shut behind us, sealing the first fracture of the night into history. Morning found me in the quiet of my apartment, but the past woke louder. I touched a chipped jar of friendship bracelets and felt a pulse of summers ago. Ethan said, "Tie it tight so it never falls," and we laughed under a clothesline sky. We were small and fearless on borrowed bicycles, racing the golden hour down our street. Jenna said, "You two hoard secrets like treasure," and she snapped a photo that became a shrine. Liam joined late that year and said, "I can keep up," and he did with a grin that dared gravity. We stacked trust like blocks, certain none would tilt. At dusk we made a pact on the cracked sidewalk and sealed it with grape soda. Ethan said, "If anyone hurts you, they answer to me," and I believed the vow like oxygen. We walked home with wet hair and grass on our knees. The future felt simple then, as if love had written us a map. Years later we shared a shoebox campus room and the smell of instant noodles. Ethan said, "If I bomb this exam, wake me with a lie that I can do it." I set alarms and learned his rhythms like a favorite song. We studied until dawn and split a stale muffin like a victory trophy. Jenna said, "I brought flashcards and mercy," and we cheered at the mercy part. Liam hauled in coffee and said, "I bribed the barista with jokes, then bowed to the caffeine gods." The window framed a restless sky, and we made it ours with sticky notes. Ethan said, "No one sees me like you do," and I smiled into my highlighter glow. The room felt like a raft we built from patience and paper. We promised to grow up without growing apart. I held that promise in both hands, certain it would not spill. On a rooftop after finals, the city buzzed like a promise we could hold. Ethan said, "Tonight, we own the skyline," and he lifted a paper cup to the stars. I named constellations wrong, and he corrected me with patience and laughter. Jenna said, "Take a picture." Memory fades fast, and the shutter clicked like a heartbeat. Liam stretched on the gravel and said, "If falling is inevitable, fall together." We drew plans with chalk, crooked lines toward kind futures. Ethan said, "When I win, you win," and the echo felt true. We spoke of jobs, apartments, and plant names we would try not to kill. I tucked that night into the safest drawer of my mind. The wind cooled our cheeks and turned us toward tomorrow. We went downstairs believing tomorrow had our names spelled correctly. When my mother got sick, he showed up with soup and a cracked joke that stitched the air. Ethan said, "Tell me where it hurts, and I will carry it for a while." I let him, because the weight threatened to quiet me. Jenna waited in the hallway with a stack of bills, organized by color. Liam said, "We will make calls until answers come," and his knuckles turned pale from dialing. Nights blurred, but his presence stayed sharp like a lighthouse beam. He learned her tea, the exact shade of comfort. Ethan said, "You can fall apart on my shoulder," and I did without apology. We shared silence like language, and let it say everything. The house smelled of broth and lemon polish, a fragile order. We kept vigil and tried to barter with hope. For a time, hope listened. We took a road trip to the coast when life finally loosened its grip. Ethan said, "Let's reset our hearts," and the ocean answered with a long blue yes. I drove while he curated songs that made ordinary minutes glow. Jenna read our fortunes from salt stains on the window and swore they were good. Liam said, "No phones for an hour," and the car became a moving confession booth. We shared secrets like postcards we had forgotten to mail. Ethan said, "Promise me we never trade us for applause," and I sealed it with a grin. We ran barefoot until the water chased our laughter back to shore. The sun slid down and stitched gold into the waves. I believed the day would hold. I believed we would too. The first crack sounded like a missed ringtone that never called back. Ethan said, "Running late, big meeting," and the message wore perfume instead of truth. I waited at the cafe where we planned our weekend, counting sugar packets like minutes. Jenna said, "He's orbiting new people," and her eyes searched the door as if they could tow him home. Liam said, "Busy is fine, vague is not," and he folded napkins into blunt warnings. Photos appeared online with captions about hustle and glow. I recognized punchlines we wrote on tired nights, performed without a thank you. Ethan said, "It's for exposure," and the word felt like wind in a cracked window. The coffee cooled, turning the cup into a small moon of disappointment. I texted a simple, "Are you okay?" and watched the dots dance, then die. A clip from a small stage crawled across my feed and sat in my chest. Ethan said, "Some secrets want a microphone," and the crowd rewarded the treason with claps. I heard my midnight phrases dressed in his cadence. Jenna said, "He changed names but not the marrow," and she turned the volume down like mercy. Liam said, "Anonymity is not consent," and the sentence landed with iron. I scrolled the comments where strangers praised his authenticity. The word authentic flinched at its own misuse. Ethan said, "I'm just telling stories," and the pronoun blurred like fogged glass. I closed the app and opened the window to let the air argue for me. The night brought no verdict, only a colder quiet. At a networking mixer he floated like a kite someone else held. Ethan said, "You should meet them," but his eyes stayed tethered to brighter rooms. I stood beside a bowl of business cards that smelled like ambition and citrus. Jenna said, "He keeps introducing you as content," and the word content peeled something inside me. Liam said, "Names before narratives," and he slid his card across with careful respect. Laughter chased someone else's success down the hall. Ethan said, "I'll circle back," and his orbit widened until I was watching a distant weather system. My smile became a coat I could not shrug off. A photographer flashed, freezing our arrangement of closeness and distance. The picture would look cheerful, and the lie would be glossy. The rumor arrived as a screenshot that did not blink. Ethan said, out of context, and the words felt manufactured for crisis. A group chat showed my confession, trimmed to a slogan. Jenna said, "This was the softest thing you ever said," and grief turned the letters heavy. Liam said, "Who forwarded it first?" and he traced the chain like a detective at a map. The thread pointed toward a handler who adored virality. Ethan said, "I never sent it," but the timestamps argued with calm precision. I felt the floor tilt the way elevators do when they lie. I saved the image and named it Lesson. The room held its breath while Trust took the stairs down alone. I found him outside a studio painted the color of fame. Ethan said, "It's just strategy," and the word clicked like a turnstile counting bodies. An assistant waved him in while my question hovered without landing gear. Jenna said, "Ask the one thing you fear," and her voice steadied my ribs. I said, "Did you trade my story for your entrance?" and the wind carried the sentence forward. Liam said, "This is the line," and he drew it with quiet finality. Ethan looked at the door that loved him, and at me who had. He said, "I needed momentum," and momentum sounded like an apology designed to pass inspection. The studio light blinked green, impatient as a heartbeat. Somewhere inside, a laugh track warmed up. The night revealed its cruelty in a packed hall where his voice carried my wounds as if they were currency. Ethan said, "True friends confess darkest fears," and the crowd gasped in awe of words they thought were his. I froze, hearing my own midnight secret cut and stitched into a monologue. Jenna whispered, "That was yours," and her hand gripped mine like an anchor. Liam muttered, "He just weaponized your heart," and the sentence rang truer than applause. My chest burned as strangers cheered for pain they did not own. Ethan smiled like he had earned sunlight, basking in applause that tasted bitter to me. I wanted to shout to stop him, but silence pinned me down. The lights shifted gold, but everything felt like ash. Trust crumbled publicly, louder than any promise we ever made. Backstage smelled of sweat and stage dust when I confronted him. Ethan said, "It's just performance," but performance sounded like betrayal sharpened. Jenna stood in the doorway, holding the silence like a weapon. Liam said, "You used her pain to climb," and his voice cracked like thunder. Ethan's eyes darted between us, calculating sympathy and defense. I said, "You broke my ribs without touching me," and the words echoed louder than his mic ever had. He rubbed his palms together, restless, rehearsing excuses that had already expired. The curtain behind him swayed like a witness, unwilling to intervene. I wanted to believe him still, but the script was too jagged to rewrite. The proof came when a journalist posted excerpts of his show side by side with my old messages. Ethan said, "They'll forget tomorrow, but I knew memory online rots slower than bone." Jenna said, "Screenshots never die," and her eyes scanned the glow of her phone like scripture. Liam slammed his fist into the table and said, "This is theft dressed as art." My hands trembled, because the betrayal was now archived, no longer private. Ethan's name trended while my pain trended with it. Strangers debated our friendship like it was entertainment. I said, "You turned me into your plot twist," and the sentence tasted like metal. He turned away, chasing a notification's glow. We gathered at the diner where our pact was first signed, the air now thick with ghosts. Ethan said, "I needed to matter," and the word matter crumbled under the weight of what it cost. I said, "You mattered already," but my voice felt hollow, brittle. Jenna stirred her coffee and said, "You rewrote loyalty as spectacle," her tone slicing through syrupy quiet. Liam pushed his plate aside and said, "You sold friendship by the slice." Ethan's shoulders sagged like curtains after a show. I searched his face for the boy who once shared grape soda with me. The jukebox hummed a love song that mocked us all. I wondered if healing could live in this booth, or only ghosts. The twist cut deepest when I learned he'd signed a contract built on the ruins of my trust. Ethan said, "They offered me the stage because of the story," and he could not see the blood in the ink. Jenna whispered, "It was your story," and her voice quivered like a violin string. Liam said, "Contracts don't erase betrayal," and his words felt carved into stone. My body went cold, realizing I was the ghostwriter of his spotlight. Ethan reached for me, but I stepped back into the safety of distance. I said, "You didn't just betray me, you betrayed every version of us we might have been." Silence fell heavier than thunder, sealing the act with a wound too wide to close. The confrontation burned under streetlights outside the venue, the storm finally breaking. Ethan said, "I never meant to hurt you," but intent fell dead on wet asphalt. I said, "You meant to be seen, and you used me as the mirror." His face twisted, half regret, half stubborn pride. Jenna's voice cracked as she said, "This is the fallout you wrote." Liam said, "You can't stand on stolen ground forever," his fists clenched at his sides. Ethan's laugh came sharp, jagged, unconvincing. I felt my chest rise like thunder, ready to split the sky. The rain began, heavy and cold, as if nature wanted to wash the truth into stone. I stepped closer and said, "Tonight you answer for every echo you sold." We circled each other like broken wolves, history bleeding through every word. Ethan shouted, "I just wanted to belong," and the confession hit like hailstones. I said, "You belonged already, but you chose applause over home." The crowd from the venue spilled into the street, faces glowing with curiosity. Jenna muttered, "They're feasting on your pain again," and the irony cut deeper. Liam said, "This is not their show, it's your reckoning," his voice steady as a drum beat. Ethan's chest heaved, torn between fight and collapse. My voice lowered but struck harder. "The stage won't hold what you burned tonight." Silence followed, louder than thunder, while all eyes waited for the storm's next strike. The words became weapons, each one drawing invisible blood. Ethan said, "You made me small," his accusation like a blade. I said, "I made you safe, and you mistook safety for chains." Jenna gasped, as if air itself had turned toxic. Liam growled, "You twist gifts into shackles because you fear their weight." Ethan's fists clenched, veins rising in his neck. My voice shook but did not falter. "You killed the bond with applause, but you'll bury yourself with the silence after." Lightning cracked above us, the storm echoing the chaos. Faces blurred. Only ours remained sharp in the battle of words and wounds. The climax peaked when he lunged with words more brutal than fists. Ethan screamed without me, "You're nothing." And the venom turned the air sharp. I said, "Without you, I am free." And my defiance rang louder than thunder. Jenna's tears streaked under rain, her sobs drowned by the storm. Liam stepped between us, shoulders squared, and said, "This ends before fists fly." Ethan faltered, his voice breaking against Liam's wall of resolve. My breath steadied as if lightning had struck clarity into me. Ethan looked smaller now, drenched and unraveling under the weight of his choices. The world hushed as if waiting for the final word. The storm broke its back as silence finally claimed us. Ethan whispered, "What's left of us?" His voice trembled, brittle as glass. I said, "What's left is mine, not yours," and the truth steadied my pulse. Jenna closed her eyes, whispering a prayer for endings. Liam said, "He chose applause, now choose yourself," his tone final, anchoring. Ethan sank onto the curb, rain cascading off his shoulders, the weight of applause gone stale. I stood tall, the thunder easing behind me, and felt grief braid into strength. Trust was gone, but dignity rose where it fell. The night ended not with forgiveness, but with the jagged freedom of walking away. Morning arrived like a verdict, quiet and unblinking. I brewed coffee that tasted like endings and poured it into the mug he once claimed. Jenna said, "Block the noise before it rewrites you," and she set my phone to do not disturb. Liam said, "Grief comes in waves, build a harbor," and he fixed a crooked shelf that had waited months. I opened windows and let the air correct the room's stale story. Ethan texted, "Can we talk?" But the words rattled like loose screws. I said, "Not yet," and the boundary settled into place with a clean click. Dust lifted in sunbeams, a soft galaxy arguing for small mercies. I gathered old photos and chose which future deserved display. Silence became useful, not cruel. When the kettle hissed again, it sounded like breath returning. I said, "Today I carry only what is mine," and the day agreed with gentle light. I walked the route we used to race, and the sidewalk remembered our footsteps better than we did. Ethan said once, "Nothing can break this," and the echo no longer hurt like a trap. Jenna said, "Healing is work, not luck," and handed me a playlist that moved like tide. Liam said, "Take the long way home," and the long way taught me how to breathe again. A group of kids biked past, ringing bells like small resurrections. I let the sound stitch my chest where the tear had lived. The sky held an ordinary blue, which felt like a gift. I practiced saying no to memories that glamorized harm. I said, "We were real and we are over," and both truths could stand. My steps found a rhythm that did not include applause. The city was not kinder, but I was braver where it counted. At therapy, I learned to name what happened without shrinking. The chair creaked like an honest friend, and did not judge the weight it held. I said, "He turned safety into spectacle," and the room did not argue. Jenna waited in the lobby with tea that promised steadier hands. Liam said later, "Proud of you," and the words landed like anchors in calm water. I listed what remains: a spine, a voice, a map that updates. The counselor said, "Grief demands witnesses," and I became my own. Outside, clouds tore open to let a rational light spill through. I did not want revenge, not in the way shows offer it. I wanted a life that did not orbit a wound. I said, "I forgive myself for not seeing sooner," and the forgiveness fit. I walked out taller than the doorframe expected. He asked for a meeting without cameras, and I chose a park where wind could interrupt us. Ethan said, "I am sorry," and the apology came unpolished, trembling. I said accountability starts where the show ends, and waited for substance. He spoke of pressure, of handlers, of a hunger that ate the rest of him first. Jenna said, "Restitution is a verb," and she laid out steps like rungs on a ladder. Liam said, "No more using her name to buy rooms," and his tone made the terms solid. Ethan nodded and said, "I'll return the material and issue a public correction." I listened for the hinge of truth, and found it creaking toward right. I said, This does not rebuild us. And the clarity did not sting. The wind carried our words away, which felt correct. We stood, separate, but less unfinished. I reclaimed the story by telling it to myself first, then to a room that asked permission before listening. Jenna said, "Start with the parts that still love you," and I did, carefully. Liam said, "Leave space for laughter to survive," and the room honored the invitation. I read from pages that smelled like new beginnings, and my voice did not break. Ethan was not the villain there. He was a lesson with edges. I was not a wound. I was the keeper of what remains. The audience breathed with me instead of at me. I said, "I choose dignity over spectacle," and the sentence held. When the claps came, they sounded like quiet rain, not thunder. I left with lightness I could carry home. The night did not fix everything, but it returned my name to my own mouth. The final chapter began in a quiet cafe where life tasted ordinary again. Ethan sat at a far corner, but this time I didn't look twice. Jenna said, "Distance is medicine," and her tone carried no pity, only truth. Liam said, "You've built walls that are windows, not cages," and I felt the difference. My coffee steamed like calm instead of chaos. I scrolled past his name on social media without pausing, proof of healing stitched into muscle memory. The world had not erased him, but he no longer lived inside my pulse. I said, "Not every ending needs applause," and the words felt like a clean horizon. Outside, traffic hummed without urgency, carrying strangers toward futures that did not involve us. The cafe door jingled with arrivals, none of them ghosts. I returned to the rooftop where we once dreamed, but this time my shadow stood alone. The skyline blinked like a patient witness, and I whispered into the wind. Ethan's name came and went like smoke, not thunder. Jenna said closure isn't a door slamming, it's a window opening, and she snapped a photo that caught the whole city, not just me. Liam said, "The view is proof you're taller than the fall," and his words settled like anchors in my chest. I breathed deep and felt the air respect me back. The rooftop no longer hurt. It belonged to me again. I said, "Some scars are just new constellations, and let the night rearrange itself kindly." The contract was annulled, and headlines moved on, but echoes remained. Ethan said in a statement, "I regret the harm caused," and the words floated like paper boats in a storm drain. Jenna said, "Public apologies feed crowds, not wounds," and she folded the article neatly. Liam said, "Healing is private currency," and I nodded, grateful. I didn't need him to be punished. I needed myself to be free. In my journal I wrote, "This was not the end of friendship, but the rebirth of self." My handwriting steadied where it once wavered. The pages smelled of ink and possibility. I said stories belong to those who lived them, and the sentence stood firm. Tomorrow waited with open palms. The witness of it all, Jenna, finally spoke what silence had hoarded. She said, "You gave more love than most could dream, and that's not weakness." Liam said, "You walked through fire and came out flame-proof," and his grin finally broke the weight. I said, "I am not defined by betrayal but by endurance," and the truth wrapped me like armor. The air carried no bitterness, only release. Ethan's absence was louder than his presence had been, but that was its own justice. The night sky shimmered faintly, promising tomorrows untainted by his shadow. Jenna squeezed my hand and said, "You wrote the ending he could never touch." My laughter came easy, unforced, and the sound surprised me. In the end, the last blow was not thunder, but a whisper. I stood in front of the mirror and said, "They didn't just betray me. They betrayed every version of us we could have been." The reflection steadied, stronger than the voice. Jenna waited in the other room with music low, safe like always. Liam said from the doorway, "Carry only what keeps you alive," and the sentence became my compass. I touched the scar no one could see and chose not to hide it. The night hummed softly. No audience, no stage, just the raw pulse of survival. Ethan's shadow lingered somewhere in the world, but it did not touch me now. I turned off the light, carrying the scar not as shame but as proof.